Hello there, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to PTSD Special Episode number 2. I'm your host for Mood Food, Jason Gordon. The views, opinions, and positions expressed in this podcast called Mood Food are in no way the views, opinions, and positions of the Department of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, the United States government, including resources listed during today's podcast. Thank you so much to everyone that has been downloading us and putting the reviews in and sending us the emails. Keep that stuff coming. We really appreciate that. Please take a moment, if you have downloaded us from the Apple Podcast platform, please take the time to give us a review. We would greatly appreciate that. If you have any show ideas, connect with us either on our Facebook page or email us at moodfoodpodcast@gmail.com. And the Facebook page, easy to find, Mood Food Podcast, and you'll find us. Keep reviewing all the items shared in each podcast, because the more you review, the more you will see yourself making that amazing progress as you are provoked by situations that can trigger unhealthy thinking patterns and unwanted reactions. And remember that reviewing is part of your Mood Food diet. June is PTSD Awareness Month. In 2014, the Senate designated the full month of June for National PTSD Awareness. And the 27th was the official PTSD Day in memory of a National Guard member from North Dakota that unfortunately took his own life. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Chris Hoffman, and we are so grateful to have him with us today. Let's go ahead and take you to that interview right now. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Chris Hoffman, a psychiatrist. And today he's going to be giving his perspective about PTSD, because June is PTSD Awareness Month. I thought it would be important to have him on the show so he can give that perspective. Back in 2014, for a little historical background, the Senate designated the full month of June for National PTSD Awareness. The 27th of June is the official PTSD Day in memory of a National Guard member that unfortunately took his life in North Dakota. So thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Hoffman. First, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background, and then you can start off by telling about PTSD, the different types, what it looks like, what you have seen as a psychiatrist, how and why it comes, and then treatment options.
All right, so as you said, I am a board-certified psychiatrist, originally from Tuskegee, Alabama, and Alabama is where I did all of my schooling, so college in Huntsville and did med school in Mobile, Alabama, and then I went over and did my psychiatry training at Morehouse School of Medicine. Now I'm here in California. I am fresh out of residency, so brand new, but I think I can handle this talk. So we can go ahead and get started. What did you want me to address first?
Let's start off with the different types of PTSD.
Okay. Most of us think of PTSD as one thing. Whenever we think of PTSD, we typically think of, a soldier who has been to war, and that experience is being carried out in their life. And then sometimes we'll talk about like some type of molestation or harassment, those types of things. You can have PTSD from anything, because obviously, first of all, there has to be a trauma. And the trauma is in the eyes of the beholder, right? So with that, there are different types of PTSD that the psychological community has kind of talked about. Some of them aren't like officially in the DSM-5 or like the mental health Bible, but they are here. And so there's the interpersonal kind of PTSD or trauma that happens. I won't say PTSD. There's an interpersonal trauma, which happens between like two people. And then there's like a racist incident type of trauma where a person encounters some type of racism, as you've seen a lot in the news today. See people being pulled over, racially profiled, being tackled or abused for no reason, all those types of things. And obviously it's based on perception. And a lot of times the overwhelming perception is because of my race, right? Mm-hmm. And so that would be a type of racist incident trauma. Then there's intergenerational trauma, where a trauma is passed down from one generation to the next. And what you see with the African American community, there was obviously there was slavery, and then there was Jim Crow, and then you have all these other things that happen. Yeah. And we're still sort of haunted by all of those thoughts whenever we see pictures, whenever we think about the stuff. Even if, we hadn't actually learned about it, it still affects us because obviously this is a person of color, one, and then two, it's in our DNA. It's how we learn how we survive this long. So it gets imprinted in our DNA. So it's passed down from generation to generation. And then there's complex trauma that you'll see in people who have been repeatedly offended. And so you think about people who grew up in, negligence and bad neighborhoods, or parents who were abusive, or maybe even a person who has been sexually abused, or you think about sex trafficking or prostitution from a young age, and how those, typically ladies, but there can be men too, but typically those ladies have this complex trauma, especially when dealing with their pimp and other men or women that they encounter. And the last type of trauma is a type of vicarious trauma where you are watching something or seeing something, you're not actually in that thing, but you are experiencing it as if you are. And so again, with just like there's the racist incident trauma that's happening all over the country right now, there is the vicarious trauma on the opposite end of the phone, where we're watching all of these events happen on social media and on TV, and it's driving Black people into certain feelings, usually being pissed off or mad or anxious and all those things, sad, and that trauma can manifest into full-blown PTSD-like symptoms.
I love how you articulated this, because people will only kind of associate PTSD and trauma with soldiers and airmen and sailors, war-related. But society right now, the environment is at this level that people are really becoming traumatized by what is happening, especially the different races and ethnicities, and it is real. And so being able to put it into those different categories hopefully is helpful for people out there to kind of understand that there's just more to it than just the war component. And I appreciate you articulating that. It's very important, and I hope the listeners were able to kind of incorporate what you've just stated into their own lives, to kind of do a little self-evaluation to kind of see where maybe they are at being exposed to exactly what you just shared. And so with that, how will the behavior come out? What will it look like?
Okay. So I would say, and I'll give a technical kind of definition first, and then talk about like the experiences. And so I say PTSD is a disorder of stress or anxiety that is unmanageable or counterproductive to having like a good life. It is a result of some kind of trauma. Now, like I said, in the DSM-5, we have our definition of trauma, where it's something that is life-threatening or kind of adjacent to a life-threatening situation. So you saw something, or, something happened to a friend or family member, a close friend or family member that was traumatic, and it felt as if it happened to you, That is DSM-5, but like I said earlier, trauma is kind of in the eye of the beholder. It's something, it's one's own perception. And so when you're looking at a person who's experienced a type of trauma and they're having PTSD symptoms, we, as clinicians will go down this list of criteria, and they don't recognize half the stuff, down our list most of the time. Are you avoiding stuff? No, I don't avoid anything. I'm okay. And then you start kind of specifying things like, okay, what's the trauma? What might be related to this? Are you still going to that person's house? Do you get anxious when you're going by that person's house? I don't go down that street anymore. Oh, okay. So you avoid going down there. So it kind of takes a little bit to actually have a person recognize the behaviors they're doing, because sometimes they don't always do it. But PTSD can actually look like anything. I've seen in my I would say short 9 years. At 9 years of being in the medical field, I've seen PTSD manifest in all sorts of ways. And so on TV, we see the soldiers who will have flashbacks and hide under things when you hear loud sounds and things like that, feel anxious and super aggressive, all those types of things. Now, that can be one way PTSD manifests, but there's another way that you see kind of with people who might have complex trauma. In complex trauma, you have, and I'll give the example of someone who's in a trafficking situation, and they have a pimp, and the pimp gives them, rents them out. And then what can happen is they form this relationship with the pimp that is like, I actually love him. He loves me. He takes care of me, all those types of things. And it becomes a different type of relationship than one you would expect. And whenever, there were all these kind of views of prostitutes and stuff like that. But then now we're taking a look back and realizing that, maybe we were wrong, and we're looking at the situation as if, these women who started out young, they're looking at this person who took care of them, and that trauma that they experienced was, one, adaptive. They adapted to it, so they had to experience, and now they actually believe that that thing was a good thing, right? So it can look like that. It can be counterproductive to what you would normally expect in traumatic incidents. It can look like schizophrenia. So I've known people to hear voices, see things, and typically when it looks like that, it's specific. So specific to the event of the trauma. Yeah. So a woman may hear the man's voice or see their image or something like that. So yeah, it can look like anything. But most of the time, it'll manifest in some kind of severe stress to where, again, it's counterproductive. That's anxiety. It's, looking and going into places and not being able to focus on one thing because you're so busy looking around and being focused on everything, making sure that you're safe. Yeah. So it can literally look like everything. And like I said, it's just that stress or anxiety that is counterproductive to life.
Including sleep issues as well, right?
Oh, yeah, sleep issues for sure. The thing about anxiety, and anybody who's experienced it, even if it was, having an interview the next day and you get this kind of sort of quote unquote good anxiety. Yeah. Anxiety is kind of an uplifting type of feeling. Whenever you have that, it can cause all of these type of symptoms. And obviously, when you lay your head down and you're trying to relax and go to sleep and you have some kind of stress or anxiety, that can definitely keep you up. And a person who has this mark of this trauma on their lives or in their brains, imprinted in their brains, it's something that is hard to turn off, no matter how much you try. Imagine going through that day after day and building on that. One thing I try and tell people is the longer you wait for treatment, the bigger this thing gets. I usually tell my patients, who've gone through some kind of trauma, so this is the thing that you're scared of. So I'm scared of roaches like crazy. I don't know if that is.
Hey, it's traumatizing, that and spiders.
It is traumatizing. Like, they are so nasty. Anyway, so if God decided to send a plague of roaches, y'all would not find me. I would be somewhere probably dead just by shock. But that's my thing. But, whenever you encounter that thing that you're afraid of, and for me, like I said, if I see a roach, I am, avoiding the crap out of it. I'm running, I'm doing whatever. I'm not going to face it, especially those flying ones. I'm not going to face that thing. Yeah. I'm not going to look at pictures. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to avoid it at all costs. And what happens is your brain kind of cycles that stuff. It tells you, that thing is scary, that thing is bad, it is, horrible for you, and nobody wants to feel bad. Nobody's going to put themselves in a situation where they're anxious and, not feeling good or not feeling their best self. They want to feel positive and in good mood. So why would I confront the thing that scares me? So it's typical of someone to avoid the thing that caused them trauma or things that cause them to think about trauma. And so what happens is, again, that thing grows because they're constantly also thinking, along with, I need to avoid that, or I don't need to go by that. They're constantly thinking, okay, that thing was really, really bad and it's scary. And it becomes, after a while, bigger than what it actually was. Yeah, so confronting that trauma kind of head on is probably the best thing. And the further away you get away from it, the bigger it kind of becomes.
It definitely affects their overall quality of life and relationships and what that looks like.
Yeah, I always see people who come in, and I know you've seen this too, but people who, they come back from something that was probably traumatizing and probably in the military, and they come back, from these areas that, these bombs were exploding and all that other stuff. Because I'm in the military, I need to just adjust, I need to get it together, but I'm back in the U.S. where everything is cool, I'll be okay. And they tend to wait years and years and years. And by the time they come in, it's like, okay, it's going to be really, really difficult to fix this.
Yeah.
But, you're the clinician and you want to help, you got to help. So, you get to it, but it would definitely help a lot more if, they came in kind of earlier or sooner. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes. And speaking of coming in and getting treatment, what do you think as a psychiatrist works the best, or at least you've seen the decrease in symptomology and their overall quality of living has improved because they're able to cope better with what has happened to them? What would you say is that what you have witnessed and experienced as a good response to treatment and what that looks like?
Yeah. So we give out meds. You just give them a whole bunch of meds. No, just kidding. The best response. So I tell all my patients, that anybody who knows me and listens to this, the best thing you can do for yourself is therapy. Yeah. I always give this analogy is that therapy is, when you get a cut, therapy is your body kind of healing itself, but the medications are the Band-Aids. Now, you can use the Band-Aids as support and block out, other infections and all this other stuff. But underneath it, the cut's still there if your body doesn't heal itself. And so getting therapy is the best thing. If you can handle therapy, that's the initial route you want to go. Yeah. And particularly, there's one, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that has shown time and time again that it really does help decrease anxiety when it comes to a person thinking about the event. But there's also this CBT type of training, or stress inoculation training, where particularly when people have bad thoughts or bad feelings or blame themselves, from whatever happened, it looks at the current actions that you have towards so if you're super irritable, or you've made yourself now this hyper masculine individual or whatever, and you start to pay attention to your behaviors and you're seeing I'm not myself, it allows you to point out those behaviors and kind of draw out the ideas or beliefs that you have behind them, and then you get to kind of figure those out as well. Also, prolonged exposure therapy, which is basically kind of getting you used to experiencing that trauma. So the example would be, somebody, you have a child or someone standing behind a door when you walk in and they jump out and scare you. After a while, they do that every single day for 2 weeks. You kind of get used to it and it's not as much of a problem anymore, right? So the prolonged exposure therapy kind of gives you, it puts everything that you might be avoiding about the trauma and the trauma kind of in your face, And so there's a couple other therapies. And of course, like I said, the medication, they're there to help. One thing that people don't think about when they are going or seeking help is that therapy lasts for a while, one, so the problems won't be fixed overnight.
Yeah.
But two, sometimes the therapy can get worse before it gets better. And it gets worse because you've spent all this time kind of suppressing or repressing these ideas. So one, suppressing is kind of active, and then repressing is like you're involuntarily or not meaning to suppress those memories. And so you're doing that unconsciously. You're kind of living your life because you don't want to feel bad, and you're kind of moving on and avoiding those things. And so, coming back to therapy and it's bringing those traumatic experiences back up to the forefront of your brain, things get worse, and you start experiencing some of the same feelings that you had at that time. But again, the earlier you experience this and start doing the therapy, the better off you are. So the therapy is great, but then medication is there as a support. And so whenever you get anxious, the anxiety isn't that bad, or you get depressed, the depression isn't that bad. And so it's there as a sort of safety net. Sometimes it cures people and people just decide, I won't get therapy, and they go on and they take the medication for the rest of their life. I've seen that happen, and they're okay. But I typically like, when people come in and they want to get on something that will, that they don't either have to be on forever, or, they can be on the lowest dose possible, and they're still using what they learned from therapy to manage their symptoms. And so those are the treatments. And again, we usually use medication as the support and, help kind of manage the individual in the meantime.
Absolutely. Definitely therapy and medication management really do go hand in hand, and it really does help people face some of those things that they are so uncomfortable talking about, but at least they have that Band-Aid to have, and to be able to slowly tear it off and watch how their inner wounds or the external wounds heal, and they feel really good about the progress. And then, like you said, if they're doing well and they don't want to take the medications anymore, then you can kind of taper that down, and then they can just use the coping skills that they have learned in therapy to continue to thrive. So I love that. Exactly. I love that. Is there anything that you would like to finalize today's information with in regards to PTSD that has not been brought up yet?
So earlier I mentioned that PTSD can look like anything. One thing I wanted to point out was how it comes about and why we have this kind of mechanism in our body. You have to remember that, our number one goal is to survive. We have, these primitive things or instincts that we have in our body that, regulate our heart rate and our blood pressure and stuff like that. But then we also have our fight, flight, and freeze response, those types of things that help protect us, where, if we experience something, we don't actually have to think about things before we are acting some kind of way, if that makes sense. And so what you see in PTSD is kind of just that. It's sort of a reaction to your body experiencing this trauma and not having to experience it again, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Jason?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So if I experience some, a bear or something comes out at me, I'm going to remember all the things about that situation, so that whenever I'm in the woods, and I hear something, I'm already ready to get out of there, right? If I'm in a situation again, I am already alert to what can happen, and I'm out of there. The problem lies where you're not in that situation anymore, or again, it becomes, I hate to say, like your brain kind of, I don't want to say breaks, but it takes a sharp toll on you to where you can adapt, or it's difficult to adapt to regular kind of situations. So going to work and being in certain environments, or in the case of a soldier who's been deployed in combat zone and now comes back to a peaceful, kind of zone in the States. Those two kind of are incompatible. They've gotten used to being alert, being up throughout the night, and, being on guard and watching things. And now you're back in the States. You don't have to do all of that, but your body still says, yes, you do, because you have to watch out. You have to survive. Another thing that I wanted to point out, so as people who are on the outside, so I hadn't particularly gone through a quote unquote like super traumatizing experience. I've been in a couple of car accidents or something like that. People have talked about me, but something that's just super hardcore. I don't know what that feeling is, but I do understand. I'm an empath, so I tend to take in people's experience and kind of experience it myself. So one thing I did before I came to California was I worked with a lot of kids. They were from low socioeconomic communities. They were in juvenile systems, in and out of juvenile systems, and you would talk to them, and they were very nice kids. And you're like, I expected to be beat up when I walked in here,
Yeah.
but not at all. Like, they're very nice kids, and you talk to them and you're like, what's happening? What's going on? But you realize the way that person grows up, the way they experience things has a sharp effect on their life. When you're seeing kids who are, violent or who are in and out of juvie, or they grow up and they become this, person who's in and out of prison and all that kind of stuff. And you see that often in the African American community. It sort of bothers me when you hear about it in the media or social media, anywhere. They blame the person for, being bad or being a criminal or all these other things. And they never really look at the circumstances that led them to this. Right. And in America, as we've seen, and a lot of us are getting to know, is that the system is set up sort of against African Americans. There are people of color who come in and they are treated differently based on obviously tone or whatever, but specifically Black people, because we've been here. Racism was built from Black and white. And so the system is sort of built against the Black people. So you have Black people who are in prisons who are sometimes showing more violence or aggression or all these things. But then you look at that and say they're a criminal, but you don't look at the circumstances. And what you see across the board is in white populations and Black populations and poverty-stricken areas, you typically get more crime and you get more of, people who are violent and all those other things. And you realize, okay, wait, no, it's not a race thing. It is a survival thing. When you are a child and you're in these situations, it's, again, survival. You're learning how to live in these environments. You're adapting, and it's very difficult to focus on school when you aren't eating and you have to figure out where you're going to get your meal from, or if, somebody's robbing your house, or if parents are fighting at home and if somebody's going to hit you today. Like, those are all things that you're focused on. It's hard to come to grips with what is 1 + 1. Yeah. The thing that you're in school for. I like this sort of chart by Houghton and Jordan, and it has 4 levels. It's survival at the bottom and cognition at the top. So it's survival, regulation, emotions, and then cognition. Those are the 4 categories, and that's the bottom to top. Obviously, survival is at the bottom. It's the base. That's what we need to focus on, usually, generally. But when you have like this good parenting or, pretty stable situation as a child, you tend to not have to focus on your survival needs. And you tend to be able to regulate a little better because, your parents are providing for you and you don't have to figure out where your meals are coming from or if you're going to get hit. And so you can focus on regulating yourself and having self-control and then figuring out your emotions and doing well in school. But in traumatic situations, what you find is the child is more focused on survival. And so the cognition at the top, there's little focus there because they're so focused on survival. And I think I wanted to point that out because when we're looking at people and we're judging them by who they are, it's almost, I don't want to say, well, when you're looking at people and you're judging them by who they are and not getting a full picture of their life, it should be said that you should humble yourself. There are certain privileges, obviously, that everybody has, but, some more than others. But it always takes, a conversation to actually understand the person. And more than likely, anybody will talk to you about their life, but you just have to ask questions and be inquisitive and actually care about that person and just not, brush them off because they're this way. something got them this way, just like something got the way you are.
Right.
So, and that difference is the circumstances that you experience. So trauma has big effects on people. You should be careful of how you are judging people when you're navigating from person to person.
It's a lifelong bruise that never goes away because it's imprinted in the mind and plays over and over again and continuously.
Over and over.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beats
and
people
like
up.
I said, it shows up. It shows up in the weirdest places, the weirdest ways. And because you see this person acting a certain way, like the person I told you who looked schizophrenic, but you notice that she was always talking about this man.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, wait, this isn't the same. And though you might treat it the same, this isn't the same condition. It isn't this person, this person isn't schizophrenic. They had PTSD. This is an experience they went through. And so it's imprinted in people. And that trauma is huge in their minds. And sometimes they cannot get past it. Yeah, and it's tough.
Those stuck points.
But it's hard to get past it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you gave a lot of great examples of what PTSD looks like. What is PTSD and then what does it look like and how it affects the body. And then also you gave some great examples of treatment options, but not only just for the folks that go and come back from war, it's for society in general. And now that there's a huge awareness about what's going on out in society now, I hope that what you shared today, people can take and apply it to their situation. They'll be surprised, I believe, if they do that and do a little self-evaluation, hopefully empower them to get help if that's something that they choose to do, but also put something like a title to their behaviors or something they've been trying to figure out for a while as to the reasons why they do what they do and why they act the way they act about certain situations and how they react to certain situations.
Very true. I mean, that's the goal, like for me, is to normalize the human experience. And we all have issues. We all have stuff. And when I talk about these things, I like to start from a place of, we all have these things. It may be a little bit more in this or a little bit less. And our adaptive, mechanisms were there for, various situations. And that's how we got to where we are. I think normalizing the human experience makes me say, okay, I've gotten this. How did I get this? Yeah. How can I be better if I'm not better? And looking at someone else, how did you get here?
Yeah.
Do you want to be better? And how can you get better? Let's do the work. So we're all human. We all have our issues. Let's figure out how to be better together,
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Hoffman, for being with us today on a very important topic and subject, not only for folks that are in the military and may have deployed and come back with a traumatic experience in mind, but also, once again, for society. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. It was an honor and privilege to have you on.
Of course. Thank you. Anytime. I don't just say that. You can call me anytime.
I appreciate that.
Of course.
I leave you today with a quote from healthyplace.com. Always remember, if you have been diagnosed with PTSD, it is not a sign of weakness. Rather, it is proof of your strength because you have survived. Be safe and good to each other, everyone. And until the next episode of Mood Food, I'm your host, Jason Gordon.